I signed 9 audit opinions between 2009 and 2018. The accounts were materially misstated for 9 consecutive years. I was not charged. I was not named in any regulatory proceedings. I retired in March 2020 with my full pension intact. I find that the correct response to that situation is to place it on record. Someone should place it on record. I am the person who can. My name is Margaret Holt. I was a senior audit partner at Kenwright & Associates, a mid-tier accounting firm in London. Between 2009 and 2018, my team conducted the annual statutory audit of Creston Infrastructure plc. Creston was a listed company. Revenues of £2.4 billion, infrastructure contracts, government clients, long-term projects. The accounts were wrong for 9 years. I am going to state this precisely, not as atmosphere, not as implication. Precisely. Between 2009 and 2018, Creston Infrastructure plc reported revenues using an aggressive contract completion method. The method inflated reported revenues by an average of 23% annually. That is not an estimate. That is the figure that emerged during the insolvency proceedings in 2019. The method was disclosed. Note 34 of the annual accounts. Every year. The note described the revenue recognition policy in language that was, I want to be accurate about this, technically compliant with accounting standards and practically impenetrable. I read Note 34 every year for 9 years. My team reviewed it. We queried it in 2011. That was the 3rd year of the audit. We asked management to provide additional documentation. They provided a technical memorandum. 16 pages. It addressed our query. It explained why the revenue recognition policy was consistent with the applicable standard. We accepted the memorandum. We did not query the policy again. In February 2018, Creston collapsed. A contract dispute with a government client exposed the revenue inflation. The client alleged that Creston had recognized revenue on work not yet completed. The allegation was correct. The work had not been completed. The revenue had been recognized. £1.2 billion in shareholder value was destroyed. 3 executives were charged with fraud. 2 were convicted. The professional regulator, the Financial Reporting Council, investigated our audit. The investigation lasted 18 months. The conclusion was that the audit had been conducted in accordance with applicable auditing standards. No audit partner was named, no firm was sanctioned. I retired in March 2020. I received my full pension. I have not spoken publicly until now. I am speaking now because I was not charged, because I was not named, because there were no consequences. I find that more troubling than consequences would have been. I need to tell you about the texture of the 9 years, not the events, the texture. The audit of Creston was not a difficult audit in the sense that most people understand difficult. It was not chaotic. It was not adversarial. Management were professional. They provided documents. They answered questions. The accounts were prepared in accordance with applicable standards. There were no surprise adjustments. There were no last-minute changes. Note 34 was reviewed every year. It was part of the audit plan. Revenue recognition is always a significant risk area. Everyone knows that. We documented our review. We documented our assessment. We concluded every year that the policy was acceptable. I want to be precise about what acceptable means in that sentence. Acceptable means within the range of policies that could be defended with reference to the accounting standard. It does not mean optimal. It does not mean conservative. It means defensible. Note 34 described a policy that was at the aggressive end of defensible. I knew that, my team knew that. We documented it in the audit file as an area of judgment. We concluded that management's judgment was within the acceptable range. That conclusion was technically correct. It was also the conclusion that allowed the audit to be signed without qualification. I am sitting in my living room. I retired 4 years ago. There is a garden outside the window. I can see it from here. I have thought about what I would say if I were asked to account for the 9 years. I have rehearsed it many times. Nobody has asked me. The regulator investigated. They reviewed the audit files. They interviewed members of the audit team. They did not interview me. The investigation concluded that the audit met applicable standards. The file was closed. I find that more troubling than being asked would have been. I want to tell you about 2011. That was the year we queried Note 34, the year management provided the technical memorandum. The query came from a senior auditor on my team. His name was David. He had reviewed the revenue recognition policy and he was uncomfortable with it. That was the word he used. Uncomfortable. I asked him what specifically made him uncomfortable. He said the policy recognized revenue at a stage when significant uncertainties remained about contract completion. He said the disclosure in Note 34 was technically accurate, but did not convey the risk clearly. I agreed with him. I asked him to prepare a formal query for management. He did. Management responded with the technical memorandum. The memorandum was thorough. It cited the accounting standard. It cited precedent from comparable companies. It explained why the policy was consistent with the standard. I read the memorandum. I understood it. I discussed it with David. We agreed that the memorandum addressed the technical question. We agreed that the policy was within the acceptable range. We did not query it again. I want to be precise about why we did not query it again. It is not because we forgot. It is not because we were deceived. It is because querying it again would have required us to say that we had been wrong to accept the 2011 memorandum. And saying that would have required us to say something was wrong with the audit. And saying that would have had consequences I was not prepared to face. That is the accurate account. I am placing it on record. After Creston collapsed in 2018, there were questions about why the auditors had not identified the problem. Those questions were asked in Parliament. They were asked in the financial press. They were asked by shareholders who had lost money. The questions were directed at the firm, not at me personally. The firm issued a statement. The statement said the audit had been conducted in accordance with professional standards. The statement said the revenue recognition policy had been disclosed in the accounts. The statement said the collapse was caused by a contract dispute, not by accounting irregularities. The statement was technically accurate. It did not mention Note 34. It did not mention the 2011 memorandum. It did not mention that we had accepted an aggressive revenue recognition policy and had not queried it again for 7 years. I did not correct the statement. I did not add those details. I was not asked to. I retired in March 2020. The firm held a small event. A few partners attended. There were remarks about my service. 41 years, many successful audits, a respected member of the audit practice. Nobody mentioned Creston. I received my full pension. I received a card signed by the partners. I cleared my office over 2 days. I took home the items that were personal. I left the audit files. I have not been to the office since. I think about Note 34 most days. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that prevents me from sleeping, but most days there is a moment when I think about it. Usually in the morning, I will be making tea or I will be looking at the garden and I will think, I read that note every year for 9 years. I understood what it meant. I accepted it. I signed the audit opinion. £1.2 billion in shareholder value was destroyed. Most of that belonged to pension funds, to people who were saving for retirement, people who had no say in how Creston recognized revenue, people who relied on the audit opinion. They relied on my signature. I want to tell you what I think about when I think about Note 34. I do not think about the technical arguments. I do not think about the accounting standard, or the 2011 memorandum, or the question of whether the policy was defensible. I think about the fact that I knew the policy was aggressive, and I accepted it because challenging it again would have been difficult. Not impossible, difficult. And I chose not to. That is what I think about most days. I am placing this on record because someone should. I am the person who can. I signed the opinions. I accepted the policy. I retired without consequence. I want to be clear about what I am doing here. I am not seeking absolution. I am not claiming I was deceived or misled. I am stating what happened. Between 2009 and 2018, I signed 9 audit opinions on accounts that were materially misstated. The misstatement was disclosed in Note 34. I read the note every year. I understood it. I accepted it. I was not charged. I was not named. I retired with my full pension. That is the record. There is one more thing. In 2013, I wrote a memo. This was the 5th year of the Creston audit. I wrote it on a Sunday evening, at home, at this desk where I am sitting now. The memo was addressed to myself. It was not circulated. It was not filed in the audit working papers. It was not filed anywhere. The memo documented my concerns about Note 34. It documented my assessment that the revenue recognition policy was at the aggressive end of acceptable. It documented my conclusion that the policy was technically defensible but carried significant risk. I wrote the memo because I wanted to record that I knew. I kept the memo in a personal file. I kept it for 7 years. In March 2020, the month I retired, I shredded it. I shredded it because I did not want anyone else to find it. I have just described, on the record, both actions. The memo no longer exists. My description of it now does. I am looking at the garden. The light is starting to fade. There is a cup of tea on the desk. I made it 20 minutes ago. It is cold now. I think this is the correct outcome. I am not certain it is sufficient. I think it is what I have. I signed 9 opinions. The accounts were wrong. I knew they were aggressive. I accepted it. I retired. I wrote a memo that documented what I knew. I kept it for 7 years. I shredded it the month I cleared my office. I am placing this on record because no one asked me to place anything on record. I find that the most troubling fact of all. The regulatory review began in February 2019. I was informed by the managing partner. We met in his office. He said, "Margaret, we've received notice from the FRC. They're conducting a thematic review of revenue recognition practices. Your client has been selected. It's routine." I said, "When do they need the files?" He said, "They'll be on site next month. Full cooperation. Standard process." I said, "Of course." I did not mention the memo. The memo was in my personal file at home. It had always been at home. The review took 4 months. I was interviewed twice. I provided my working papers. I provided my technical consultation records. I provided my correspondence with management. I provided everything that was in the engagement files. The memo was not in the engagement files. At the second interview, they asked me about Note 34. They asked me to walk them through my assessment of the revenue recognition policy. I walked them through my assessment. I used the same language I had used in the memo. Aggressive, but defensible. Technical compliance achieved. Material judgments exercised. I did not say, "I wrote this down 7 years ago in a memo I have kept in my house." They asked me if I had any concerns at the time. I said, "I had professional skepticism. I applied appropriate challenge. Management provided representations. Technical consultation confirmed the treatment was supportable." That was all true. It was not complete. The review concluded in July 2019. The firm received a letter. Findings noted. Improvements recommended. No enforcement action. The managing partner called me into his office. He said, "Good outcome, Margaret. Well managed. You handled it very well." I said, "Thank you." He said, "You're retiring in March, aren't you?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You've earned it. 40 years. Clean record. You should be proud." I said, "Thank you." I went home. I took the memo from my personal file. I read it again. I put it back in the file. I did not destroy it then. I considered destroying it. I did not. In November 2019, the client announced a restatement. Revenue had been overstated. Note 34 was specifically identified. The misstatement was material. It covered the 9 years I had signed opinions. The announcement was made on a Friday afternoon. I was copied on the firm's internal email. The managing partner wrote, "Team, you will have seen the announcement. This is clearly a significant matter. We will cooperate fully with any further investigation. Please preserve all files and records." I read the email at home. I walked upstairs. I opened my personal file. I looked at the memo. I closed the file. I went back downstairs. The regulatory investigation began in January 2020. It was not routine. It was a formal enforcement investigation. The firm was notified. I was notified. I retained a lawyer. My lawyer said, "Margaret, they will request all documents. All documents means all documents. Anything related to the engagement, anything in your possession." I said, "I understand." My lawyer said, "Is there anything they should know about? Anything that might come up?" I said, "My working papers are complete. Everything is in the files." That was true. My lawyer said, "Good, that's good." I retired on March 15, 2020. It was a Sunday. I had planned to retire on Friday the 13th, but I took the weekend. I cleared my office on Thursday the 12th. The firm was already moving to remote work. COVID. Most people were working from home. The office was quiet. I packed my desk. I packed my diplomas. I packed my professional certificates. I took 3 boxes to my car. On Friday the 13th, I stayed home. I organized my files. I had kept certain documents at home throughout my career. Not audit files. Personal professional development records. Technical update files. Industry research I had paid for myself. And the memo. I had a shredder, a cross-cut shredder. I had purchased it years ago for disposing of household documents with personal information. I shredded my old CPE certificates. I shredded outdated technical guidance. I shredded conference materials from the 1990s. I shredded the memo. It was 4 pages. I shredded each page separately. The shredder made a particular sound, a steady mechanical sound. I remember the sound very clearly. I emptied the shredder bin into a black bag. I put the bag in the wheelie bin outside. Collection was Monday. The bin was collected Monday morning. My lawyer contacted me in April. She said, "Margaret, they've issued document requests. They want everything. I've sent you the schedule. Please review carefully." I reviewed the schedule. The request covered all working papers, all correspondence, all memoranda, all notes, all documents related to the audit, wherever located in any format. The request specifically stated, including any documents held in personal files or personal devices. I read that sentence 3 times. I responded to my lawyer. I provided an index of all documents in my possession. The index was complete. The memo was no longer in my possession. I did not say, "There was a memo. I destroyed it in March." My lawyer said, "Perfect. This is exactly what they need. You're very organized, Margaret." I said, 40 years of audit practice. I was interviewed in June 2020. It was a video interview. I sat at my dining room table. My lawyer sat next to me. 2 investigators appeared on screen. They asked questions for 4 hours. They asked me about Note 34. They asked me about revenue recognition. They asked me about management representations. They asked me about technical consultations. They asked me if I had any concerns. They asked me if I documented any concerns. They asked me if there were any documents not included in the audit files. I answered every question. I answered truthfully. I said I had applied professional skepticism. I said I had challenged management. I said I had concluded the policy was defensible. I said all my working papers were in the files. They asked, "Are there any documents you created that are not in the files?" I said, "All audit documentation was filed in the engagement files in accordance with our documentation policy." That was true. The memo was not audit documentation. It was not required documentation. It was a personal record. They asked, "Did you keep any personal notes about the engagement?" I paused. I said, "I may have kept technical research in personal files, industry updates, things I referred to across multiple clients." They said, "Do you still have those files?" I said, "Some were disposed of when I retired, outdated materials, old guidance." They said, "Did any of those materials relate specifically to this client?" I said, "I don't recall anything specific to this client outside the engagement files." They moved on to the next question. The investigation concluded in March 2021. The firm was sanctioned. The partner who succeeded me on the engagement was sanctioned. I was not named. I was not charged. I received a letter from my lawyer. She said, "Margaret, good news. You're not included in the enforcement action. Your retirement timing was fortunate. They appear to have focused on the later years. You can close this chapter." I said, "That's very good news." She said, "You must be relieved." I said, "Yes, very relieved." I ended the call. I sat at the dining room table. I looked at the garden. The daffodils were out. It was March again, 1 year since I had shredded the memo. I thought I should feel relieved. I did not feel relieved. I did not break the law. I consulted with 3 different solicitors over the following year. I did not tell them about the memo. I asked hypothetical questions, questions about document retention, questions about personal files, questions about what constitutes required documentation. The answers were complex. Audit documentation has specific requirements. Personal notes are different. A document addressed to yourself, never circulated, never filed in the audit records. The legal characterization is ambiguous. Destroying such a document during a routine office clearance, before an investigation identifies you as a subject, the legal characterization is ambiguous. Failing to volunteer the existence of such a document when broadly asked about personal files, the legal characterization is ambiguous. I spent 40 years dealing with ambiguity, technical compliance versus substance, letter of the standard versus spirit of the standard, aggressive versus misleading, defensible versus appropriate. I am now on the other side of that ambiguity. The question I cannot answer is this: did I shred the memo because I was clearing my office, or did I clear my office so I could shred the memo? I retired on March 15th. I chose that date in 2018. I informed the firm in June 2018. The client's problems emerged in November 2019. The investigation began in January 2020. I retired in March 2020. The timeline is factual. The intention is not factual. Intention is internal. I cannot audit my own intention. I know what I did. I know when I did it. I do not know why I did it. That is not true. I do know why I did it. I shredded the memo because I did not want to produce it in the investigation. I shredded it because I knew what it would show. It would show that I knew. It would show that I wrote down what I knew. It would show that I kept that record for 7 years. It would show that I knew there was a problem and I signed the opinion anyway. 9 times. The tea is cold. The light has faded. I should turn on a lamp. I am not turning on a lamp. I am 70 years old. I have a pension. I have savings. I have a clean record. No one knows about the memo except me. I am making this recording because someone should know. I am making this recording because I cannot live with being the only person who knows. I do not know what happens to this recording. I do not know if anyone will listen to it. I do not know if it changes anything. I know that it exists. I know that I made it. I know that I said what happened. That is what I have.